Hey Brad, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. This might be your quickest turnaround from a new hire to one of these, huh?
I did one with Andy Campbell, who
Yeah, I
just,
saw that one.
yeah. So I don't, I yeah, timing. It's pretty close. Andy was
He
you
gets
know,
an
Andy and I
asterisk.
had
He's
been
been at the
talking for a
school
while.
since 2013, though.
That's true. Yeah. So, well, thanks for doing this. Thanks for jumping on. When are you headed to Proctor? Are you still down in Carolina now?
Yeah, we're still in Raleigh until the end of June, so hopefully in time, the Canes can get us a ticker tape parade and then go on up.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll just jump into it. So for you, this is a return to independent schools, right? We'll talk about all the great things you did at NC, but like for you, starting all the way back as a student at Millbrook when
Yeah.
I was a prep student as well.
Yeah, we're really excited to be headed back up as a family into the New England independent school world. As you know, that's where our paths first somewhat crossed. I think when you were at Brunswick, although probably not remembering it exactly, but I'm sure you put some by me when I was playing goal
I,
for Millbrook
I
at the
don't
old
know.
Dorothy at the old Dorothy Hamill.
Yep.
So going way back there. So yeah, and that's really this where this journey started, and it's kind of fun actually. With Vinny Soriento, he was a teammate of mine, and so a couple of us doing this, it'll be a lot of fun. And then spent time at Tilton School and Worcester Academy before we actually took a little bit of time off from coaching when we were down at IMG Academy for three
Yeah.
years. But while, obviously taking time off from coaching, that was certainly an immersive athletic experience, and that will be used to benefit my athletes at Proctor. And then
Yeah.
came up here. I have two daughters. We ended up at an all girls boarding school in downtown Raleigh, which was fascinating, right? Like my wife went to Northfield Mount Herman and I went to
Yeah.
Millbrook, two schools that, it's funny. People think of Proctor as rural, and it is, but it's not isolated.
Right.
NMH and NMH and Millbrook are certainly rural and isolated. So,
Yeah.
those were our experiences. And then we were in downtown Raleigh where we could go outside our front door to probably about 300 restaurants, walk up to the campus of NC State, and a great experience there. And while doing that, got linked up with the NC State club team. And, that's something that as an ACHA team has really been something of supernova over the last 3 years. It
For sure.
was, it's funny, in this prep school context now, when we first started, if we got a prep school kid, it was a third, fourth line kid that just wanted to join a
Continue to
fraternity,
play.
play a little hockey. Their serious days were behind them. We almost jokingly refer to them now as weekend warriors of the hockey world, right?
Yep.
Now it's really switched where our guys that come out of prep school, they're top, Ben Patterson, who was a PG last year at Deerfield, almost a point a game guy. And, these are guys that are doing hockey first. And, so really took off. And most of our guys were coming out of juniors at this point. And,
Right.
we can, and NCDC, null, some null stuff. But, in this conversation, it's worth noting, likely NC State has an ACHA M1 team next year, top half. Well, not likely, but likely in the top half. 11 of our guys, even if they went on to play juniors, which most have, still went to New England independent schools.
Yep.
And I think that's really important in this, right? In that, that preparation for it. And you're seeing the rise of all this stuff in the South. And it was fun to be part of that rise and kind of pushing that rise. But, as a family, our hearts, we're independent school. We're an independent school family. We're a boarding
Yeah.
school family. My kids were fac brats on the campus of St. Mary's, and they're excited to get back to grazing in the dining hall. And when we were up at Proctor last week, I think that might have been the highlight for them.
Yep.
I'm just certainly the future teammates and people there. So yeah, it's exciting to get back, and particularly in New Hampshire, where we have a lot of roots up there, and actually a lot of former colleagues that are at Proctor Academy.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's so interesting to me, like, and exciting, I think, for Proctor, reading through and as we spoke last week, like learning more about your background is not only, I think, the varying levels and of hockey experience that you bring, right? Having coached at different levels and done different things. But to me, also, your independent school background and like what you've done at these different schools and now stepping into beyond the hockey role, right? Some pretty important roles you're going to play outside of the rink at Proctor. There's, I think, a really similar background to myself, right? Like, sort of, I got into hockey and then I started getting into school administration and doing more on financial aid and admissions. And now that's all led me back to hockey and in some ways like a similar path for you.
Yeah, and I think that's what really excited me about. I mean, the hockey part is huge. It's a huge part of
For
our
sure.
lives as a family. But what really excites me about going to Proctor is going through. And by the way, I think probably one of easily the quickest interviewing process. It was still thorough. Don't get me wrong. I think
Yeah.
met with everybody and anybody.
Yeah.
But from my first conversation with the administration there to a contract in my box was a Wednesday to a Wednesday.
Yeah.
But what really excited me about going through the process is I do, I kind of do have a little bit of a unique independent school background. I've been at an all girls school, even buried back in there right out of college was Georgetown Prep, an all boys Jesuit school, right? IMG, which is really the mother of for profit independent schools out there.
Yep.
And, but what really made me excited about Proctor was that they were eager to lean into those backgrounds and experiences. And when you look at a place like IMG and how they do admissions, it's very different than any other place, right?
For
And
sure.
that's not a value judgment on it. It's a different model. But I think some people, sometimes when I've spoken to schools about that aspect, it almost scares them off with in terms of, well, what does that mean for our school culture? Well, at the end of the day, your admissions office is still selecting your kids that are mission appropriate and mission fit. These things don't have to be mutually exclusive, right?
Yep.
Looking as to where you can expand your audience base for your great programs you have doesn't jeopardize the culture of your school, right? And especially Proctor knows who they are. They know the proper size fit. Part of the reason I left IMG is it was skyrocketing from 750 students to 1,500, and that's too big for me.
Yeah.
And it's harder to find mission appropriate kids, right? When you're doing rapid expansion, those growing pains are really tough. But Proctor knows the sizing that works for them. So if you're leaning into different techniques and admissions and stuff like that, you're expanding your markets and you're actually going to get yourself even more kids that fit the mission and will be passionate for what your school brings to the table. And Proctor brings so much to the table. We're really excited to get up there.
Yeah, and I think why I bring that up is having been around prep hockey a long time, as you have, oftentimes you see, and I know I had some really good friends who were involved in the hiring process and went through the process at Proctor, and I know they had a lot of great candidates. The last couple of weeks, there's some other coaching opportunities that have popped up. And, with the level of play in prep hockey, it's never surprising to me that there are college coaches who are interested in coaching prep hockey. For me, the challenging thing always with sometimes those hires, which is so different about you, is college coaches see the role of it so differently, right? Like I'm going to go out and recruit the best players from my program. If they meet the admission standards of my school, they're going to be admitted, and now I'm going to fill my roster spot. And like, as you're talking about, like with your experience in independent schools and now being a proctor, like finding good hockey players is a piece of that puzzle, but understanding like are they going to be capable of finding success academically at Proctor? Are they going to be add to the community? Do they want to have an experience that's going to extend beyond hockey? College coaches think about those things really differently than I think, prep school coaches and prep school admission offices have. And so, like, I knew in our conversation last week, and from what I've heard from people, like your background in doing this and it being so varied, I think gives, you and the school an opportunity to get these great kids who are going to be proctor appropriate, but also get, for lack of a better term, throw gasoline on that hockey program and get it back to a point where it was not too long ago, like a very successful hockey program.
Yeah, and I think too, it's funny you mentioned that about, college coaches. And ironically, as you were saying that, I think actually one of the things that made me successful at NC State was because I actually really took an independent school admissions mindset to the players we were bringing in the NC State is,
Yeah.
really thinking about who works in this school culture, right? Like it's a, and so if you look at that and you're always looking at who fits the school culture, who fits your team culture, and your team culture and your school culture really should be one and the same.
Yeah.
That kid's going to have a great experience. Their actual playing experience will go up because there will be more buy-in with the community to come see them play. And the TED can get really loud when they're banging on the metal on the inside. It doesn't take much to make it look full and
Yeah.
make it a tough place to play. So it's really a symbiotic relationship that benefits all. And I think the other thing too is you want a players, and every school claims this. Some do it better than others, as you well know. The Proctor experience is really designed to be an immersive one. And whether it's a kid that, one of my interviews actually was with a returning player who is in Spain right now, right? You want someone that's going to take part of that, or else they're not getting the whole Proctor experience, right? So looking for a kid, and Proctor again, a lot of schools use the terminology, experiential, but Proctor really is, its learning is experiential, right? If you walk through the buildings, and I think particularly for boys, right? Boys do learn differently than girls at times. But by the way, I think they meet both boys and girls actually, but we're talking boys hockey right now. When you think of the arts and you walk through and you see the foundry and the hands-on ways that can lead boys into, okay, yeah, it's art, but it's also engineering, and how that can add on to their experience in ways and engage them in ways that are so intentional that it's really impressive. And I think, I can't wait to get more and more kids up on campus and seeing it and feeling it.
I think one of the things Proctor has always done exceptionally well from like my vantage point of being, whether it's on the admission side or doing what I'm doing now, is relatively small. Obviously, like we classify it as a medium-sized, quote unquote, medium-sized boarding school, right? But in I think to the people who listen to this, who have kids in public schools or even in private day schools, most of these boarding schools are smaller, and Proctor is one that's, in that, I was talking about medium-sized schools at 300 to 600 student range. To me, they're like, for a school with its size, the amount of diversity that exists within that student body. And like what I mean by that is not just racial, ethnic, or geographic or socioeconomic, but as you mentioned, like it's this place where you've got this great group of students who are all motivated to do well, but you've got these students there who are, some are passionate athletes, some are really passionate artists, some are students who have this unbelievable, and the resources to have outdoors experience at Proctor it's tough to match that. And I think to your point, where it is really different than college hockey, and I say this a lot to parents because of the age of the kids, is I think you get students who go into a place like Proctor maybe self-defining themselves as one of those things, right? Like, I'm an athlete, I'm an outdoorsy kid, I'm an artist, and Proctor is one of those places that, as you said, is going to, I think, allow you to have a passion and pursue that at a really high level, but also really force and require you to say, like, hey, you're not just that one thing, and you're going to have to try some other things. And I've always admired the admission offices, their ability to find that kind of group of kids, which is really different.
And, that's one of the things too, right? Come for the hockey, but let hockey be the medium that introduces you to the school, right? When you decide to come, it should be for a lot more than hockey, but it's the person that's the entryway that introduced you to it. But what Proctor does, and really any good independent school, and I think Proctor does this especially well, is allowing you to try on many different hats there, right?
Yep.
To, expand and enlarge your identity. And, actually one of the reasons we even decided to reclassify my daughter going there was not so much from academic and maturity stuff. It was to be able to experience and have the ability to try on all those hats, right? So your identity actually moves and expands, and you're adding different elements to it. And there are so many different hats to try on there. For, as you said, a medium-sized school, it's really impressive, right? I think sometimes smaller, medium-sized schools, they run into almost the economy of scale problem, right? Like how
Yeah.
much can they actually offer a student?
And do well.
And yes, and do it well, right? What's clear to me is Proctor is able to have a robust program and do it well.
Yeah.
And they're okay with, a model that, creates maybe some inefficiencies in other areas, but, in the back end, but it's worth it to deliver to their students in terms of an immersive experience.
Yeah. No, and I think that's where, as I've said, over the course of, I'll have three, as we talked about, I'll have three
Mhm.
boys I've worked with who will be on that team next year. Over the last couple of years, I don't know how many I've had who've gone through the admissions process at Proctor, but a lot, more than a handful. And so in speaking with their admission office and Mike Walsh, who's stepping down
Love
as a
Walshy.
Colgate alum like myself, as I looked at that when Mike announced he was stepping down and thinking about like, I knew they would have great candidates, but what are they going to need in order for this to be successful for them? It was like, I always thought it's like, well, you're going to have to find someone who has this sort of experience and understanding of, what is a unique independent school environment. But from a hockey standpoint, also is stepping into a position where you've got this great and storied program that has had this history of success that now is at a point where like, I don't know if we use the word rebuild in prep school, right? But this idea of like needing to get it and your hockey background, particularly with what I think did at NC State of like, for lack of a better term, building that program. I'm excited to see how quickly this can get going for you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'm excited. I mean, we're already going in terms of recruit. Obviously, right? We're on
Yeah,
here, but I think one of the things that excites me about it too. I think there's two parallels. There's actually a couple parallels to what we did at NC State. I think number one at NC State is really very much a we thing, right? We had some great alums. We had students. We had a community, even right down to Rod Brindamore
yeah,
and some others that were on board with helping push this, and build it. And that's a parallel to Proctor. I think it's very much a we thing. Walshy in the last week, I mean, I cannot tell you, actually last week and a half, how big of a help and support, and way more than just a cheerleader. He wants this to thrive, and he's going to be there next year, which is outstanding, right? Sometimes I
yeah,
think when you're coming in for someone that's been for 25 years, it's like, well, do you really want them still there on campus? In this case, absolutely.
right.
He's, had a legendary run, a couple dogs ready to be campus dogs next year. And then if you look at the administration from Gregor and the AD's office to admissions, everyone wants this to be successful. So I think it's a we thing. I even heard from any alum that I've ever known that's played hockey there, even if it's in passing. I heard from them in the last week. And I think that's really important. And I think the other parallel is just the strength of the community.
Yeah,
NC State is probably one of the strongest and healthiest secondary school communities I've been around, and Proctor is the same way.
yeah,
But they're also, I think, communities that want to push forward and push on to the next and get creative. And, I don't know if I mentioned this to you. I think most prep school programs in terms of the player experience, and a lot of ACHA programs are the same way, or NCAA, they kind of live a little bit in the same box, right? Like
yeah,
some do more things that one way than the other, but how can you differentiate yourself and kind of push out of that box a little bit? And that's what we're looking to do, right? What can be the NEPSAC version of NC State hockey? When you look at, we really maybe not the best way to describe it, but our one of our team leaders for NC State next year described us as almost we became the Kardashians of
yeah,
ACHA hockey with, whether it was our social media stuff or, playing in front of 26,000 people at Carter Finley Stadium, the football stadium, doing an outdoor game every year, AAA at a AAA ballpark, playing on a military base versus a military academy, right? All those things that add it to our player experience. And, also, but little touches of making sure they're off for a few football games, right? So
yeah,
what does that look like at the NEPSAC level? and how can we create that to kind of get Proctor outside the box. And this is what really interested me the most about Proctor, is Proctor's always been thinking outside that box and
I was just going to say that.
what the traditional New England school look, right? So that's what, you mentioned some schools and their openings, and some are great jobs, amazing schools, right? But for me, looking at how Proctor has always kind of looked, how do we push the student experience outside of that box? And, how can we do it and do it appropriately and professionally, but, enhance that. A lot of schools, love the term student experience right now. And I love that they talk about that, but right, it can't just be a throwaway word, right? Like, there has to be intentionality to it. And Proctor was always worried about that student experience before it really became the buzzwords and people started renaming positions about it and stuff like that. So, that ability to cross and enhance that is what I'm really excited about. I'm not saying we don't have enough alums in the world probably to play in front of 26,000 people. But what does that look like on the NEPSAC level? And that's what we want to build and get towards.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting because I think one of the huge attractions around NEPSAC and prep school hockey is the tradition of it, which is a phenomenal tradition of developing great players and going on. I also live this from both sides too, having worked in those schools and now trying to help families find options and opportunities. There's points in which that tradition around how we do things or the way we do things can, I don't want to say impede progress, but slows it at times, right? And I've always admired, as you said, like I think about not just from an athletic standpoint, but Proctor to me was always one of those places that I thought I think about things they were doing years ago with their curriculum and how they were supporting students to their outdoors programs, to whatever it is, that I think looked at it in a really healthy way of like, hey, how do we best serve our students, regardless of kind of what everyone else is doing? Like we are who we are, and we need to figure out a way to do what we do exceptionally well. And I think, I'm really excited for I think to see what you're able to do there are the ideas, because anytime it's going to be successful, I think that's going to spark some other people to rip it off, right? And that kind of innovation really leads to growth.
Well, and I think too, I'm definitely my athletic director when I was at St. Mary's, love the phrase, and a lot of people do, right? Like a high tide raises all ships.
Yeah.
And I think particularly for the Lakes region, I want to, and by the way, not that they need me, these schools are doing really well already, right? But
Sure.
if I can come in and help and help raise that tide for all of us, there have been so many people that have been raising that tide already, but another person to help it and keep pushing that league in that area to forward. And I'm excited to be a part of that. And there's a lot of expertise within that coaching group already, and hopefully bringing what I have to offer into that, or another way, a better mall brings in more shoppers, right? I think there are more than enough awesome student athletes out there to fill all of our teams at a high level. And if we have a great shopping mall, all of us up there, we're all going to get our fair share of players and have great programs and keep these great rivalries going. And there are such great rivalries in the Lakes region. Looking forward to our first Holderness days already, in those aspects. So I can't, I'm even looking forward to some of our first games against Tilton down the road. It's funny, so much cross-pollination in the coaching staffs at Tilton and Proctor over the years, whilst you having been there. Although ironically, when I was working in the New Hampshire State House, I actually got, and I'd say the joke, it was a great experience, ended up roped into being assistant coach on the girls team way back in 2004, then went to Tilton. So, but yeah, that ability, I think, to raise all that. And I think, one thing that I hope to bring as a voice in the NEPSAC coaching world is New England prep school hockey, even with realistically having to go play juniors for most kids, even to play at a top ACHA 1 school, let alone a place like Tufts or what have you be, again, prep school relevancy in the admissions office is still really important. And in that preparation, as I said, NC State is looking at 11 players next year that came through the New England Independent School route. Yes, the vast majorities went on to play juniors, but when I took those transcripts to the admissions office, there weren't holes in them. The rigor was on point, right? The preparation there. A lot of, when I take my pre-reads to the admissions office, a lot of the kids that didn't come through that, it was like, we could get them in if they do X, Y, Z.
Right.
Meaning go back and, get going with some junior college classes, get up to, whatever it is, right? And they would need to kind of scramble and do that work. Very seldom, I think I had one case of a New England prep school kid where that happened to, that was playing juniors, but that was only because they were, I think, a 1 or 2 year kid.
Right.
So they didn't have the full body of the rigor in their transcript. And I think prep schools, and it's why by the end really, and if to go a step further, if you look at a school like NC State that has certain requirements of how many kids have to be from in-state, the percentage of my out-of-state kids that were prep school kids, that goes to almost 85, 90 because of that preparation. So, for me, when I was recruiting, yes, I see a kid on the, let's pick any, even actually even one of my NCDC West kids came via the New England prep school route. Like, so if I see a New England prep school, I do watch that kid a little bit longer because I know there's a better propensity of getting that kid, that kid's going to be admissible. And I think prep school and prep school hockey needs to really bang the drum on that because I think it's actually more relevant than ever. And then the other part is the fact that, for Proctor Academy and me, if you go and play now 5 and 5, we'll say people play 2 years of juniors, right? But I'm going to stay with you that whole time. You call me and say in your second year of juniors, Coach Healy, look, you have a built-in advisor for life. Would mean coming to Proctor. And I'm not the only prep school coach that will be that way, by the way. I think we all would be.
For sure.
But, so that, hey, so that advisor to call that you've built that bond with, the admissions that college counseling office that is still going to work and take care of you, understanding what it looks like and going to there as opposed to maybe a big public school guidance office. So I actually think in this age of juniors to get to college hockey, prep schools actually play almost a more important role than ever just because of what it looks like on the back end of that process.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on a couple of things there that, like, for me, I've had some conversations with different people involved in and around NEPSAC, and Tim Jonicus now Tim stepping away and taking on the role as president of NEPSAC and different things around that idea of, as great as the boys prep hockey league is, right? The effort as a body or some unifying messaging around prep school hockey as opposed to like school by school, I think is critically important in this time, right? Like, and so some of what I'm trying to do with these conversations is present this awareness of like, hey, prep hockey and the prep experience is this unbelievable thing that you can have. Now, within that, you've got to figure out which of these schools might be different, but it's something that I think offers students this awesome experience. And I do think now with all of, I've gotten this call, I'm sure you have too, in the last 2 weeks around what do all of these new NCAA rules mean for what my kid's path is going to look like. I do think with all of the uncertainty around no one being able to answer that right now, like how many years of junior hockey are kids going to play? What does it mean if I reclassify? Our college is going to really have players playing for 5 years. No one knows any of that. To your point, having a prep school experience where you're going to have the opportunity to develop athletically at a really high level, but more importantly from my end, as you said, like put yourself in a position coming out where all of these options are available to you, right? You can go play junior hockey. You might be able to go play club or NCAA hockey right away because you're going to be admissible at some of these places. Or you've also had this chance to experience all of these different things at prep school and understand what hockey might mean for you as you're going to college. Like, I think the value proposition of it right now is maybe higher than it's ever been.
Yeah, I mean the 5-5 is irrelevant if you can't get into a school, right?
For sure.
Right?
Yep.
That it's, and what I mean by that is you may actually have great grades. I'll give you an example of a kid that ended up having to do some junior college classes that I had through. This is a kid that started playing juniors in high school. Actually had, and let's get rid of the weighted, unweighted stuff. He had a 3.8, excellent GPA. Everything was A's, but at some point he got the worst academic advice ever, and he had
Yep.
no AP courses.
Yep.
And so because hey, someone said, well, it's going to be really tough to take AP courses and do all this travel for junior hockey. So now you're applying to a top 25 public university business program like State, and it was a non-starter from the get-go. And you can't, and it's too late, right? It's in his senior year. So in that case, not that Acha is 5-5, but let's say that had been another school, a NESCAC school, right?
Yep.
A C-band, right? Like he was dead in the water at the start. We worked through, played another year of juniors, got him into the junior college classes, thriving at NC State, amazing human being. But there had to be a little detour. Something like that is not going to happen at Proctor Academy or,
Right.
95% of other prep schools. I actually hope 100%.
Yep.
I just don't want to speak with I believe 100%, but
Yeah. So do I.
mistakes do happen here and there. But right. And I had so many of those kids that, that actually happened to. Their GPAs were great. They started playing juniors, say their senior year of high school, reach out, and it's like, I can't. Well, I have a 3.8. I'm like, yeah, but you have no AP classes. There's no rigor in it. You haven't, I mentioned the term super scoring, and they don't even, it's a foreign concept.
I had no
right?
idea what that means.
And so I think that coming again back to, the 5-5 stuff, there's so much uncertainty out there, but New England preps, we can create our own certainty. And our own certainty is of what that finished product is going to look like. You have all this chaos out here, right? Some are unknown. We can't change that, but this is what we know, right? And we've been doing it. Even when you look at the hockey academies come in and the incursion, right? Love some of the folks over at Masters Academy. One at Masters, my former boss is one of the ones leading it.
Yeah.
But right, they've never put a kid into a NESCAC school, right? Not one, right? Yes, they will eventually, right? That will probably be over 12 months from now. But, all of us, we've been doing this, generally speaking, for 80 to over 100 years, right? So that is the certainty, right? That's the value proposition. You look at the other hockey academies who, what they're really trying to do is create independent boarding school light, right? They're cutting those corners. They're cutting, a funny story actually as an example of this. When I was at IMG, we had the US 17 soccer team there. It was awesome. That was like the Polachek era. Like really, it was great. And MLS teams were just getting into the academies, and there's some of the people were coming to campus, and the person that ran that branch of USA Soccer said, I want you to present to them what it takes to run a truly healthy boarding school environment. And he said, and I want you to scare them to death with it. I want you to talk about all the layers of counselors. I want you to talk about your college counseling wing. I want you to talk about all your dorm parents. I want you to talk about their security. So they realize all the layers of support that we have for our students that they could never replicate or afford to replicate. So what's happened in a lot of the hockey academies, right? They've come on, but they haven't really replicated that level of support. So you're paying less, which is great until something goes wrong and you don't have all those layers of support.
Well,
and I'm not bastardizing all. Some of them are good.
But
I'm not gonna. Some of them are really good, but some of them, and that's they're trying to be boarding school, independent school light, and they just won't get there unless you have massive amounts of investment. You look at Masters, how much money has come into that just to catch up to the level of support that schools like Proctor Academy have had for over 100 years.
For sure. Well, and I love talking about this topic too, right? Of like, with a lot of academy models, hockey, there's some other ones out there too for some other sports I deal with. Like to your point, I think oftentimes what they don't necessarily recognize is like financially to be sustainable and create highly competitive athletic programs is a challenge, right? And when you don't have the resources and support, and you see this a lot where these academies pop up, and for a year or two we'll have really good teams, right? Because they're using their financial aid resources or allocations in a way to make sure the number one priority is that our team is going to win. The sustainability of that, sometimes it doesn't last long. And then the other part of that is, yeah, as you said, I think about hockey in particular, both on the boys and girls side. The biggest difference from some of those sports that you had at IMG, like my son's a soccer player, right? You might know these numbers better than I do from being at IMG, but it's like I think there's 300 Division I soccer programs, another some close to that number at the Division III level. Largely, if you're a good enough player, academically somewhere in there, you're going to find your
You'll find a
place.
place.
Hockey on either the boys or girls side is so different, right? In the sense of at the NCAA level, you've got really small numbers, and then even at the ACHA level now, certainly at the top of that, where you look at what are the really competitive teams, like all of those are really hard schools to get into, right? Like I know with the investment, like down where you are beyond NC State, like the investment UNC is making in their club program, like you could be a really good hockey player and that's going to help, but like you're going to need to be admissible. And to me, there is still no path for kids where those things are all looked at in the same way. I always say this too. Parents ask me to that student you brought up before. One of the big differences between independent schools and public schools. Like they ask me that around like academically, what are the differences? I say this like, look, I could get into workload or what the expectations are going to be, or homework or class size, and all of that is different. But for me, one of the big differences is like at these independent schools, at Proctor Academy, the success of the school is determined by the outcomes and opportunities that your graduates have. Like that's it. The curriculum is designed to create opportunities for kids. Public school model is very different. Like success for them, their funding, their financial success is dependent on how kids are doing on state testing, things like so. Like granted, some of those kids are going to go to great colleges, but they're not going to be in situations where, at Proctor, I'm guessing here, you probably have 5 or 6 college counselors, right, who are working with a graduating class of somewhere around 100 students, right? Like it's a really different model.
I think you're exactly right. It's funny you bring up the college counseling piece and the class registration piece. Down here for the junior canes and Kaha, I've spoken to families about, yeah, you're bringing me in to speak to you as a hockey coach at NC State, but I'm actually not going to speak to you about hockey.
Right.
You're one way to become a player that could potentially play for me at NC State. You're in 8th grade, 9th grade. That's a long way off. But what's here right now are things like your course selection to keep you on a path to selectivity, right? And so that's what you actually have to worry about now. And it's been a little bit humbling actually with my daughter who started and I love her public school. Go Athens Tribe Jaguars.
Yeah.
She's having a great experience. But to be able to get her in the classes that she needs because of the size, I'll give you an example. She has, not going to say zero interest in the sciences, but pretty close. They put her in 3 science classes this semester, right? And to back out of that was really difficult. And again, once you start getting down a certain path class-wise, it's hard to bring that back. And that's where, independent schools come in, right? That as a freshman or a sophomore. So I'd also say the earlier you can get there, right?
Yes.
and is the better off too, right? So that development that's happening, just not from a hockey standpoint. And I'll give you another example from her Athens Tribe stuff, right? She is, where she's going to kill me because I'm speaking about her, teenager, but that's fine. But, we were talking about the state of North Carolina, the legislature has set minimum requirements, why the legislature is doing this, to get into a place like NC State or UNC, right? In minimum language. Well, that minimum language requirement actually doesn't get you in. All it does is confuse stuff, right? And so when she was meeting with her counselor's like, you're finished with Spanish after this year, because I think she's through Spanish 3. You don't need to take it. You're not. And I'm like, oh no. You need to, right? And like that, the conversation was like, hey, this is a bare minimum requirement, where a conversation in a guide, in a college counseling office at a proctor is like, yes, but this is the reality of the situation and why you need to keep taking this. Not that it's all about rigor and about those things, but as long as colleges have kind of that set level deck, and the reality is your colleges are, I look at where I went in Fairfield, like the amount of applications they're getting now, it's absolutely insane. And same thing with NC State, right? And you're looking at more and more college kids, trying to go from north to south. And some of those colleges have caps on your out of state. Some don't. They want to take all the out of state revenue they can. Well,
Sure.
But that minimum doesn't get you in, right? And so, a college counseling office at a proctor, they will have that real meaningful conversation of, okay, what do you really want? And this is what that means or not, or doesn't mean. Ultimately, like, there needs to be some choice and will and buy-in, but it needs to be an educated choice where, that didn't happen that day in that office for my daughter. Now we came home and we had that conversation. And, I clarified to the point where I actually pulled out 2 transcripts, blanked out the names, one that I knew was going to get into state, one that I knew that wasn't, and kind of said, hey, let's do a comparison here. They both have great GPAs, but let's really look at this. And so, and that's the level of expertise and time that will come in an independent school college counseling office.
I see it sometimes if I get older students working with me who are thinking about going to prep school as, say, like a repeat 11th grader or PG or something like that. And they'll say that, like, well, in their school, they met with the college guidance office. And don't worry, they'll say this to me all the time, don't worry, we've been on the NCAA track, like all of the clearinghouse stuff is taken care, like, and I'm like, well, right, like meeting the NCAA clearinghouse doesn't mean anything, right? Like all that means is that a coach at the Division I level theoretically could offer you something, but it doesn't mean that even that coach's school has to admit you. So like, what you need is somebody who's going to sit with you and understand. And this is what, to your point, like I've seen this with my own kids. I lived it. And I think what Proctor does is that idea of, for you next year, whether it's Division I, Division III, or club hockey coach is coming to you about one of the juniors on your team and saying like, hey, we have interest in him. You being able to go sit with the academic deans in the college office at Proctor and saying like, hey, I just had these conversations with this coach. He has interest in this student. We need to all make sure that like he's in the right classes or that he's in the best setup to make him the most attractive to be admitted there if the hockey interest is real, versus sometimes it's the hockey interest is real, whether it's coming out of academy programs or kids who are playing club, and coaches are, particularly now with so few college programs sitting there going like, we'd love to have you, but I can't get you in.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, and I think you'll see some of this too. This goes to a little bit of what you're saying and the tracking and getting you in, so there was a kid, and it was a Proctor kid who, while she called me about him his senior year, and he wasn't quite ready for us yet. So he went on to play juniors, but I knew he was admissible.
Right.
So I kept tracking him. I kept tabs on him. Right. So it wasn't a question. And, there's a few kids that like that all the time they're almost all exclusively independent school kids that I know. Okay. They're admissible. We can keep that, they're worth pulling into that pool.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so I think the other thing for like, I think with this, what parents are going to hear, but I think also, as I think about you stepping into this role at Proctor, because of this vast experience, I see you have both on the hockey, but on the school side, right? Being able to, in some ways, I always worry about when I see new coaches sometimes step into programs, and even I start having conversations with them, and they'll be talking to me about a kid like, well, he's a great hockey player. We really want him. And I can sit there sometimes and be like, hey, we should talk about his admissions profile because I'm not sure it's necessarily going to be the right fit for your school, right? But I think for you, that background, I think your experience, but also your
Right.
vantage point, I sit here today and go like, it's going to be work to get Proctor's program, hockey program, to exactly where you want it. And like you said, I mean, the Lakes region is no joke, right? Like you got some of the top programs in all of knapsack hockey are in your backyard. But um, yeah, I mean, it's doable and exciting.
Yeah, and I think that actually, I think there's two things too, right? I love building things. That is, and I think that goes back to even my time at Millbrook, where it was such a
Yeah,
transformational time, and then even when I got to Fairfield, like that was like that notion of building. NC State was building. Even when I got to IMG, that was a time where it was switching from all these independent little, Ledbetter Golf or this to one comprehensive school, and so now, and what's really fascinating about Proctor is I don't I don't see it as a rebuild, but it is about a build in what, kind of what and we Proctor's bought into this, or else I don't think they would have hired me, right?
right.
It's built in kind of this building this vision and the next stage of it. And that's what, it's here, and it's won New England titles, and it's had kids play at Harvard and all these
Yeah.
places, right? So, and
And
now it's,
recently, like done those things recently.
yeah, and so, to be able to take that from there, we have a player, in the KHL and that stuff. So, right, to be able to go to that next level, I think that's what really excites me. But, the tough neighborhood really excites me too. It's
Right.
funny down here, in college basketball parlance, you have NC State, Duke, and UNC. And we had, Will Wade as a coach for NC State this year. And, he turned tail, went back to LSU after 1 year because I don't think he wanted to be in the tough neighborhood, right?
Right.
And I think it takes some, he can go win it, get his 20 wins at LSU, and everyone be happy with him. But right in this market for basketball, you've got Goliaths right up, and right, it's a tough neighborhood. You got to want to be a part of that, right? You got to want to be a part about that life and in that neighborhood, and compete with it, and not be afraid to. KUA, amazing program, right? But it makes that neighborhood tougher, and you have to embrace
Yeah.
it, right? You look at what Holderness has done. Tilton won a small school title not too long ago. New Hampton, once they brought that new rink in, was an igniter. And then when St. Paul's decided they were going to leave the ISL and join it, right? So it just made
Yeah.
that neighborhood that much tougher. And that's what I'm really excited about, because it's funny, a former player of mine said something about that notion of, by the name of Matt Johnson, who was there when we were at Tilton. So, and he said something that I think is really crucial about it. When you see some of these academies or AAA teams and they play 60, 70 games, how many of those games are really good games, tough competition games? It's not about the number of games. It's about the number of tough competition games. And if you look in the Lakes region, right, you're having that pretty much every Wednesday and Saturday. And that's something to embrace. And win, lose, or draw, that is a competitive game that is going to, iron sharpens iron. And I think that's one of the great things about, looking what's happened up there, in the last, actually, not even 15, 20 years. It's been a long time, 25 years.
Yeah. Well, and like I think you said too, like it's KUA now, obviously what their program has been for, call it maybe the last 10 or 15 years, but it wasn't that when we were playing prep school hockey.
No.
Like that's not what KUA was. Holderness, Alan's done a phenomenal job there, right? In the last, call it 10 years. It's kind of really grown into that. You mentioned Tilton and New Hampton and those places. And so like that's also for me where I look at it and go like that I see Proctor as a place that I think I don't know what the time, I'm sure, your timelines and goals for it are probably going to be faster than mine would be, but like, I think it's going to be there and be there very, very quickly. Yeah, I'm super excited to see it. Talk a little bit about, I know you've had a chance to meet with some of the returning players and some of the newly enrolled players, but yeah, what's your roster look like heading into next year?
Right now it was a unique coaching search
Right.
in the length of it. And so right now, we're not filled out yet. And meeting with the guys that I have, I've been impressed with their leadership. I've been impressed with the questions they've asked, how I think they're hungry for some of the things I was talking about, whether it be off-season workouts, how the fall can look, so that the current guys, again, it's, to be point blank, we don't have the prep school McDavid and Draisaitl yet.
Right.
But even they're sitting home watching the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Why, if you look at the Canes, they don't have those guys, but they're 7-0 right now in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I think our roster, by the time we get it all said and done, I think it'll look more like, say a Hurricanes roster versus, maybe a Colorado roster. And you can compete with that obviously quite well.
For sure.
But yeah, for families that are out there and still deciding, we're definitely still building and bringing in kids for the fall. I mean, there's no question that we got a couple new kids in the March-April period, but not as many as they would have hoped. But those spaces are still there. The admissions office, we're still really open and working with me. Our financial aid budget in terms of hockey stuff is not exhausted yet. So yeah, right now, do I have a full roster for where I want to be next year? Absolutely not. Definitely could use probably, 3 forwards, at least 2D, and we have some in process. I feel good about our goaltending, so we have that squared away. That's a big one, right? To go into the summer
Yeah,
and not
huge.
have to feel
Particularly
like
in
I'm
that
beating them.
league, right? Like you can,
Yeah,
if you've got a really good core group and a good goalie, like you can, keep yourself in them anyways.
yeah. So I think but yeah. So families are looking, and I've had a couple things, when you reach out to people, it's like, what ages are you looking for? I don't think, I'm not, if a kid can play and it's the right cultural fit, fine, PG. If they can help us as a sophomore, let's go. As a freshman, let's go.
Yeah.
To me, it's more about fit and, how much, and are they going to help us compete in that tough neighborhood right now?
Yeah.
So, so families looking at this, and, you're coming up at that time in the school year too, where, maybe you're at that big public school and you're going to, you're going to get your final grades, or you're coming up to the end and you start to have those conversations. Is this really where the right fit is for us? And you think, okay, we have to look at prep schools next year because the moment has passed. The moment is not past when it comes to Proctor Academy right
Well,
now.
and I say this, you're not alone in that, right?
Yeah,
Like I have had in the last couple of years a number of really great kids who are great students and great athletes who found options and opportunities through these summer months. And I also think it's going to be really interesting to see, at least in the US here, with how all of this stuff potentially shapes out with this NDL change in USA hockey and things like that, that I do think that's going to impact what some families are going to be thinking about for this fall. And I think there's going to be a lot of really talented players who, through no fault of their own, are going to find themselves in a situation where their club hockey season next year may look really different than what they thought it was going to look like in
yeah,
March.
and I think there's a lot of families too going through this period now of like the constant tryout period. That the constant, tryout stuff is a reality on the junior thing that's not going away, but in the AAA aspect, it is.
Right.
It was really refreshing to kind of not have to worry about that so much with my own daughter knowing where her primary place will be. I think it wears you down. I don't think it's particularly healthy developmentally for the kids. Not that competing for a spot is wrong. So I think this is where prep schools can come in, right? It can take you off that youth sports private equity ramp. I mean, you saw what happened with Black Bear this week, right? And do we want our kids mixed up in a private equity wheel. Not that all private equity is bad, by the way, right? If it's the right place, I think,
Just interesting that they're like youth sports is where it's landed. Is
yeah,
shocking.
right. And not all is bad, right? If it's the right company, if it's the right alignment,
Yeah,
the right people, then then it can be great. But a lot of it isn't, right? And so, do you want and I think there's going to be a lot of parents, and there are a lot of parents having that conversation. Is it time to get off that hamster wheel? Because prep school sports are not youth sports, right? And I think that is their holistic environment that is rooted in a deeper mission within the school. And Proctor exemplified, and you feel that the moment you drive into Andover, New Hampshire with Proctor. And so I think there's going to be more and more families that are having those conversations, right? It might even be something like that USA Today article that came out yesterday on Black Bear, right? It could be as something as simple as that, right? And again, not all these things. Like, for example, I think Edge Sports and their facilities are amazing in what they're doing. But so I'm not trying to bastardize all these kind of bigger conglomerates at all. But but I think families are going to have that conversation. And when they're looking for that exit ramp, there's a group of schools that have been doing this for a long time and doing it in a values and mission driven way.
Well, and I think it's to your point of like where, I think the big difference there, and this is, as we reach sort of near the end, right? The difference is like private equity, good or bad, they're buying up these things. Their end goal isn't hockey development, right? It's or developing students. It's about there is a good way, maybe that provides opportunities for kids, or maybe it doesn't, that they're going to be able to make a profit off it, right? Like that's the goal of any private equity firm. Again, I go back to that idea of like Proctor Academy, but these schools in general, like success for them isn't. I said that I talked to Dale Reinhardt. I did one of these with Dale a couple of months ago, and Dale, he's been at Kent a long time and a hugely successful program. And he's like, look, I'm not going to get fired if we lose 30 games. I will lose my job if kids stop developing and stop having options or opportunities coming out of here. But it's not going to be because of my wins and losses. And like, I think the appeal of it is that the goal of these schools is very clear, and they've been doing it for a very long time. And like, that's not going to change.
Yeah. And it can't change because it is our compelling value. It is our differentiator.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was great. And we'll definitely be in touch over the next couple of weeks and months about, as I said, any kids who I have who are still looking for September, but I'm also going to get back up to campus this fall. So
you bet. All right, Brad, thanks for having me, and go Hornets.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks. Have a great weekend.
We'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.